For those who are joining, I just want to introduce Peter Browne. So Peter has been working with us in Sydney for a couple of months now as our pitch doctor. And he's been a great help in getting some of our residents ready to either pitch to customers or investors. He works across Singapore and Australia with a lot of the Antler cohort, as well as its Cylon in Singapore, Peter. Yeah.
Yes.
So he's very versed in this, and I'll leave you in good hands here. And we've got a couple of more joiners as well coming through, so that's good. So you might want to just start with an intro and go slow, and we'll give people a chance to jump in.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah. So as Jackie mentioned, I have clients in Singapore, and the reason for that is that I was living in Singapore until July last year, and from 2012, I've been working with startup founders in accelerators in Singapore and Jakarta principally, and then since July last year back here in Australia with Antler, with Fishburners, with Stone and Chalk, with Energy Lab, and others. And so I want to talk today about, share with you, I guess, my insights into working with founders for the last 7 years. What works really effectively with investors, what investors are looking for, and what are some of the dangers, I guess, with pitching that I've witnessed and hopefully tried to correct. So why don't we just dive in? I'll share my screen. Pardon me. So I've called this presentation Pitching to Investors. And the photo that you see there is a young chap from India many years ago at JFDI Asia pitching to a room full of investors in Singapore. I think before we sort of crack in, I just want to focus on the investors a little bit. Basically, investors are investing in yesterday and tomorrow. And by yesterday, I mean they're investing in what you have achieved so far, and therefore what is potentially capable of achieving tomorrow. And up until 3 or 4 months ago, yesterday and tomorrow were quite similar. But now things are completely different. So what you have achieved yesterday is possibly quite different from what you will be able to achieve tomorrow. And so there's 3 options. Either tomorrow, because of the virus, is going to be business as usual, nothing changes, or it's going to be completely challenged by the circumstances that are surrounding, or there may be an opportunity. So I think that when you're speaking to investors, you really need to indicate what effect the virus is having on your business and what you are doing about it, and also what you are seeing in the market. When you're talking to your customers, when you're talking to partners in the space that you're operating in, what are you seeing? And you're able to report that back to investors and help give them an insight into the particular windows you're looking through. And that can lead to quite a deal of interest from the investors to gain a better understanding of the markets that you're operating in. So for the investors, I think what they are doing now is they're sitting on their hands a bit. Their risk appetite is perhaps diminished. And so they have time, and they're using that time to consider what's happening in the market, and also to consider what people are bringing to the table. And some of the anecdotal evidence that I've heard from accelerators and from individual founders is that investors are still willing to meet, but their meetings are shorter. And why are they willing to meet? It's because they still have capital, and in some cases they have a mandate to deploy that capital to invest in business opportunities. So they're still looking for opportunity. And so then it's our opportunity for ourselves as startup founders, or for yourselves, more precisely, to really focus the investor's mind on what the opportunity is, particularly in your circumstance, obviously. But has that opportunity changed? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Is it on hold? Or is it business as usual? And so being able to clearly communicate the nature of the opportunity that you're pitching is quite crucial. So when we look at the investor pitch, what are the dangers that I've seen with people pitching their ideas formally in a pitch to a room full of receptive people, or informally when they're discussing their ideas over the table or at a networking event or whatever? So I think primarily people can tend to leave it to chance. And what I mean by that is that they will stand up in front of a group of people and just start talking about their business opportunity. And this can either go really, really well, or it can be so-so, or it can be poor. So I think that you have the option to take control of your messaging, be consistent about it, get good feedback on your messaging. And by doing that, you're taking control of each situation that you're in, so that each situation that you're in is a good experience for yourself and also for your audience. I think another danger that I see frequently is people want to tell everything about everything. And I guess the principle behind that, particularly with technology people and engineers, is that unless you understand all of the detail, all of the specifications, you won't fully understand the benefit of what you're describing. And I think that's a fallacy. I think that I posted about this last night on LinkedIn. I'm currently working with a bunch of cybersecurity founders in Singapore. Well, they're all over the world. They're from Poland and San Francisco and Singapore and Australia, focused on cybersecurity businesses. And what I was talking to them about is this Thomas Friedman quote, which is, to simplify accurately, you must understand deeply. And so what you guys have as founders is you have the deepest understanding of anybody about your product. But your challenge is really to simplify that accurately so that investors or partners are able to understand what it is that you're proposing, and then be stimulated to find out more, to want to know more from that accurate simplification. And that then takes people into the amount of detail that they want to know, rather than you giving them all of the detail and them getting confused and getting lost in the detail. So I think this is a fallacy, the need to tell everything about everything. And we need to be able to guide people towards simplicity of understanding that leads to their desire for more information. The third danger that I've seen frequently is where your pitch is open to interpretation. So the language that you're using can be interpreted in a number of different ways, and the law is that if it can be interpreted in different ways, it will. And so then if you lose the audience by sending them inadvertently in the wrong direction, you've then got to bring them back and precisely explain what it is that you are doing, rather than having a general explanation. So I think having information that's open to interpretation is a real danger for those reasons. So how do we control our information? And if we look at journalists, they have what they call the inverted pyramid as a guiding framework to help them sectorize or categorize their information or their story. And so the headline of their article contains the most important information, if you like, the accurate simplification. And then they move down into further detail in the storyline and into the real detail at the bottom of this inverted pyramid. And why it's called the inverted pyramid is that the most important information in your subject matter is the least amount. And so that's the accurate simplification. And then we move into the next level of important information, which is the middle of the pyramids here. And then the most amount of information, which is your detail, is actually the least important information when you're communicating the thrust of a story. Obviously, the detail is crucial when you're at implementation stage, because as they say, the devil is in the detail. But when you're communicating, you really need to be able to crystallize your content to create understanding that arouses curiosity, that stimulates question and gets you into engaging conversation with your investors. I think the simple principle in another way of looking at it is getting rid of what you don't need. And when you look at this bust here, it's been hewn from a randomly formed block of marble. And what the sculptor has done with his tools is chisel away absolutely everything that they don't need, so that they're left with the purest form of expression. And you frequently hear writers talking about this, that when they're editing their content, they go through it and delete what they don't need. They take out what they don't need. So I think this is a disciplined approach that gets you to that, as we discussed earlier, the accurate simplification. So what do investors want to know? And this is probably going to be nothing new to you. This is the template that I'm going to share with you is one of many, and they're all variations on a theme. This is the template that has been developed by Techstars and the Global Accelerator Network through very thorough examination of thousands of pitches from probably around 2005 to 2010. And as I say, it's nothing new. So your problem solution traction segment is an interesting grouping because the problem leads to demand for a solution, and then traction is evidence that your solution is effective for those people with the problem. And those people with the problem are your customers. So I think in this little segment, we want to identify their customers, really accentuate and communicate what is the pain that they're feeling, what is the difficulty that they're having, which is creating demand for a solution. And then what is the nature of your solution? How does it address that problem? And what is the traction, the evidence that you have that your solution is effective? So I think this section, if we simplify it further, this section of your pitch is about validation. So this part of the pitch is about validation. The next part of the pitch for the investor is really about opportunity. So is there a market of substance? And what is the business model that you're going to apply to that market? What is your go-to-market strategy? What is your pricing policy? What is your customer acquisition strategy? All of those elements is leading the investor to understand the opportunity. And this is what they're investing in. If you think about it, they're not investing in the solution per se, they're investing in the opportunity that that solution creates with the market. And then finally, we look at the team and the team's vision, or the team's future roadmap, or the team's strategy, and then what you need to fulfill that strategy. And this section of your pitch is about execution. So if you think about it in these simple terms, validation, opportunity, execution, then what we're talking about is how do we navigate ourselves through the pitch? Now I'm talking about the validation. Now I'm talking about the opportunity. And now I'm focusing on our ability to execute. So by having that roadmap, if you like, through your pitch, it helps the investor understand where we're coming from and where we're going, which is crucial to them. So I want to emphasize that this is not a product pitch. And when I work with founders in accelerator programs, and accelerator programs are traditionally over 3 months, including Antler. The Antler has their first 3 months, which is let's find each other and let's find an idea. And then the next 3 months is we've settled on an idea, we've been approved by the Investor Council, and we're doing 3 months of developing this business to initial customers. So that 3-month period is, the first 2 months in particular is very, very focused on the customer, very, very focused on engaging with the customer on your product, selling your product to the customer. And then when we start to focus on investors in the last month of the accelerator program, and that sometimes is like trying to rip barnacles off a ship, because we're so rusted on to the process of communicating our product benefits that it's difficult to switch our focus to what the investor's looking for, which is a business opportunity that solution creates. So please understand that when you're talking to investors, you're not selling the product, you're selling the business opportunity. That's what they're investing in. They're investing in high returns. If they're deploying capital, they want that capital to, at the very least, break even. But certainly they're really looking for strong returns, and that's where they're making their decisions, is on the potential for strong returns created by that problem, solution, traction, evidence. So we need to start thinking when we're talking to investors about what is the nature of the business opportunity. And I find this approach, going back to our template and crafting a single simple statement, a simplified, accurate statement about each of these segments, gives you the backbone of a pitch that covers all of the things that the investor wants to know. Usually I attribute about 3 or 4 minutes for people to actually craft a statement. And that very act of crafting a single statement for each of these elements by default forces you to eliminate what you don't need and focus on the one thing that you do want to communicate. It's a very, very strong exercise, and it gives you a terrific skeleton for your pitch that you can then expand from about a 2-minute pitch to a 3, to a 5, to a 7, to a 15 or whatever. But having this as a spine, this as a basis, is a really, really useful exercise. It doesn't take long. If you put the clock on for 3 or 4 minutes and just force yourself to quickly come up with a single statement, you can generally come up with a very accurate simplification of your pitch. So when you're pitching, you have the opportunity to tell not only the total story of your pitch, but also individual stories within the pitch. So I think crucially, there are your customers' pain points and the identity of your customer. And you can tell that, if you can tell that story very quickly, then you can graduate from the singular experience of one customer into the plural experience of many customers, which then extrapolates into a market opportunity. I'll give you an example. There was a Vietnamese business which was focused on selling nappies online, and their problem statement was this. I was in Saigon with my wife, and we saw Mum getting onto her motorbike with arms full of nappies and her 3 or 4 children under 6 or 7 years old. And she rode off into the street, and I turned to my wife and said, we have to make Mum's life easier. And so far, 9,000 mums in Saigon are ordering their nappies from our platform. So that very brief statement gave us an indication of the pain that the customers was feeling. Then it gave us an indication of the solution that they had applied to that problem. And then it gave the traction in numeric terms of what they had achieved so far. So that was very, very simple, very, very accurate, and very brief, and allowed them to move from the validation into the business opportunity very quickly. Their pitch at the beginning of the accelerator was 2.5 minutes, and at the end of the accelerator was still 2.5 minutes. They were completely confident that a very crystallized pitch would tell the story to investors, and they received investment, and their business is still flourishing in Vietnam. How are you going to grow your business becomes a story within your pitch. So we've taken this validated opportunity, and what are we going to do to make it happen, to proliferate it through the market? That is a story that you can tell, that has a little narrative sequence within your pitch. And why are you doing this is crucially important. And I think for people in the fintech space, many of you, or many of them, have left very comfortable corporate positions with a career path, with superannuation, with holidays, with bonuses, and have left the comfort of those positions for a startup where the future is insecure. And so why are you doing that becomes an important point. And I think one of the trends that I've seen in the 7 or 8 years that I've been involved in the startup landscape is that we are seeing more mature startup founders, people coming to create new businesses from a deep and experienced background. And particularly within fintech, you see founders who are just very frustrated by the inability of their organization to take advantage of this opportunity. So it's like, what the hell, we'll do it ourselves. And that becomes very motivating. And in some cases, you see whole teams that have left an organization to build something from the start. So I think that story of why you're doing this, it can come out in your team section. It can come out in your problem section. For example, when I was working with X global bank, we saw this opportunity and it wasn't being addressed. And the customers were so frustrated. And so we decided we would leave and start to build this solution. And so that story gives many facets to the investor. Here are experienced people. They've seen the problem. They've seen the inability of big organizations to address the issue, and so they could be capable of disruption that is going to lead to fantastic returns. So the story of why you're doing this can become very, very important. And we as individuals sometimes have a reluctance to, what we say, beat our own drum or blow our own trumpet. But if you can be objective about why you're doing this and give that objective information to the investor, it can be very powerful. A quick word on financials. I saw this quote years ago from the Shark Tank program in Australia. This is the 4th season of Shark Tank, and they're still turning up. They don't know their numbers. They can't tell us where they hope to be in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think the particularly with very early stage businesses without customers, there's a reluctance to project into the future. But I think that you need to be able to give an indication to investors of what your plan is, and that when the due diligence is applied, starts to examine what are your assumptions, what is your methodology for getting to there, and so what is your raison d'etre, etc., for achieving outstanding returns for investors. So I think that this becomes really important. And this is a direct quote from a Singapore investor, a guy called Michael Blakey, who's with Cocoon Capital, and they're an early stage business focused investment company. Investors like numbers. And so what numbers should we be including in our pitch? We should quantify our traction. We should quantify the market that we believe we can achieve within a total market. We should give pricing indication. We should give strong projections that indicate clearly where we're heading with our business opportunity. And when we quantify these numbers, we're giving the investors the elements of an equation that they can test your numbers against their thinking. They can look at, okay, here's a market opportunity, here's a pricing structure. Then if they achieve that sort of number of people, that will give that sort of income. That's interesting. So I think that numbers need to be accentuated in your pitch. I want to touch on the problem with slides, and having worked from the early 90s through to around 2002 with Bankers Trust in Sydney, I experienced many slide presentations. And the problem with slides is I believe this, that PowerPoint is pointing you towards populating your slides with bullet points. Now, bullet points is a sequence of messages that you want to communicate. Principally, that's your script, not your slides. That's your script. The worst example of this I saw was in China, where a Chinese presenter began his presentation by saying, I'm uncomfortable speaking in English, I'm going to speak in Chinese, and I have a translator here who will translate for you. And then his first slide had about 8 bullet points in English on it. The audience read through the bullet points while the gentleman spoke in Chinese, and he spoke in Chinese for, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes as he went through each of the bullet points, which the audience had read. Then over to the translator, who in halting English read verbatim each one of the bullet points that the gentleman had been communicating in Chinese. And so for the first 3 or 4 minutes of a 1.5 hour presentation, the audience was really in for a long haul. So this propensity of PowerPoint to steer you towards bullet points is a real danger. The bullet points are useful in the sense that they're the messages that you want to communicate, but that's your script. So the principle with slides is that they should show the audience what you're talking about, show the audience your key message. It's a visual medium while you tell the story. There's an organization in Singapore called High Spark who have come up with this very nice indication of what slides should do. They should simplify and amplify your message. And then it allows you to give the detail while the audience has that visual reminder of what is the key message that you're communicating here. If we look at this simple indication of a roadmap with the time, which may be from 2016 to 2020, or it may be from 2018 to 2022. So your time quite simply explained in the bottom, and then a title that is telling us this is what this slide is about, and then an indication of an achieved growth or a projected growth. And what we can see in the pattern is that there are 2 spikes. And then an indication quite clearly is what did we do to achieve those 2 spikes? So we're using here visual elements to clearly articulate a story that we can elaborate on with further detail when we talk it through. But we're just really looking at the slides to emphasize what it is that we're talking about. When we're using slides, there are 2 decks, and in the time that we had available to us now, where perhaps our business plans are on hold, or just the fact that we've got more time available to us in our days, focusing on the 2 decks that you need is a great opportunity for you, actually. So with your pitch deck, as I mentioned earlier, there are variations of what they include, but generally they include less detailed examination of your business than you include in your investor deck. Principally, your pitch deck is going to show the same information as your investor deck, but in a much more visual manner, because you're telling the story. Whereas the slides that you're sending an investor need to tell the story succinctly still when you're not there to do it. And so back here, we're looking at how an investor deck goes through similar information that a pitch deck does. And some of the research around investor decks will show you that they're generally about 20 slides and that they generally take investors about 3 or 4 minutes to go through. So what that tells us is that they're skimming through the hundreds or the thousands of investor decks that they're getting through the months and years. A couple of investors that I've spoken to, Jungle Ventures in Singapore, will get 3,000 business plans across their desk in a year and invest in 7 companies. Cocoon Capital get around 1,500 meetings and 1,500 investor decks. They invest in 5 companies in a year. So your investor deck has to withstand the scrutiny of a 3-minute skimming. So the principles, I think, is you have to have a very clear indication of what this particular slide is about and a very clear substantiation of that in brief terms. If we go into incredible detail, we're forcing the investor to focus a lot of their attention on this information. And if it doesn't help them understand what's going on quickly, you're forcing them to take a lot more time than they may have available or they may have the appetite for. And if you're dealing with an analyst at a venture capital company who has a lot to get through, they may dismiss regardless of the quality of the content. So you really need to be able to focus your content clearly so that the message comes across quickly. Okay, so I want to spend the last little bit of time here on online communication principles. And if we start with video, this is a frequent image that we see. And what is happening here, quite simply, is that the light source is behind us, so it puts us in silhouette. And you can see here what I have in this image. I've got the darkness here because the light source is there with the window. Now, the further around I come, the clearer the lighting is on my face and gives a better examination of my face. But it also shows the background. I'm actually in my son's bedroom, so I've made a compromise here. But quite simply, what we want to do is have the light source in front of us so that we get good, even lighting on our face, and the investors and our audience can clearly see who they're engaging with and get the full benefit of those facial expressions, which we're sort of losing in this instance. We can enhance this with lighting. For when it gets dark, I have a light here that, it's not connected, but I'll show it to you anyway. There's the light that I can use to, particularly later in the day, get even lighting on my face. So lighting is very simple principle, but you need to deploy it. And then the other principle that you want to use is framing. So, here, this is what we call too much headroom, and here is not enough. And so we just want nicely composed, well-framed image to help the audience just have a pleasant experience, if you like, and a clean experience. So using the camera on the computer to give yourself decent framing before you start. And then I think the other thing with the camera is when you talk to the camera, you're actually starting to penetrate into the eyeballs of your audience and deepening the engagement. And you may use that for emphasis. So you may be looking around here on the slides, and then you might want to make a clear point to your audience. And so using those technical tools, the camera, the lighting, the framing, to help the audience with their experience. A quick word on audio. This is the key thing that you need to consider. When you, for example, I'm using a really simple microphone here, which puts the microphone near my mouth, And so we've got a mathematical distance between the microphone and the mouth. As soon as I take that microphone computer, I'm moving away from the microphone. Pardon me. And so the further away from the microphone is actually picking up extraneous noise. So by using a microphone close to our mouth, we increase the quality of the sound. So I'm not sure how that demonstration came across, but I hope it demonstrates the simple principle that a microphone is a technical instrument that brings the source or the recording of your sound closer to your mouth and therefore cuts down the background noise, because your voice is dominating in the microphone's capacity to receive information, and therefore communicating that information a lot clearer than when you're far away from the microphone. Now, I think in online communication, one of the again, going back to anecdotal evidence, what I'm hearing from some founders and from some accelerators is investors do have an appetite still to communicate, but their meetings can be shorter. So when their meetings are shorter, we really need to have clarity of information. So I think we really need to have that focused content. So going back to that exercise of the pitch template, and then taking the time to craft single statements about each element of the pitch, you're able to answer questions succinctly. And if you can trust the simplicity of your answer, what will happen is the investor will either go, I understand, I don't need further explanation, or I understand, but tell me more. And so when you work on that simplistic information, or that, not simplistic is the wrong word, simplified information, and you trust it, you can communicate very focused content that is either completely understood or indicates that the investor would like to ask more. Tell me more about that. And that really is what you're after, is engagement. I think key elements, particularly in this circumstance of COVID-19, what is your traction to date? How has your traction been affected? And so I'm speaking with some companies in Asia that are having massively increased traction because they've pivoted from fashion to PPE, to personal protection equipment, and they're achieving enormous traction out of offering, through the same design, manufacturer, distribution process, a different product, and they're achieving amazing traction. So what is your traction historically? How has the virus changed the traction? What are your customers telling you? And then what does that mean for your projections going forward, short term in the virus period, and then long term when things either go back to what we considered normal, or in other cases, change. And some of the changes that we're seeing that I believe going to continue is online learning in the schoolroom and in universities at primary, secondary and tertiary level. Online learning, I believe, and online classrooms are going to become a much stronger feature of the landscape than they previously were. And then if you look at health, how we're now able to have telehealth engagements with our medical professionals. And this change virtually happened overnight when the government said, we will allow the medical fraternity to claim Medicare for these, or to charge Medicare for these interactions, because we want to facilitate that. We want to reduce risk of patients going into doctor's surgery, and we want to facilitate healthy engagement. So these are a couple of examples of how things may change dramatically for the future. And you guys who are interacting with customers and feeling their pain and asking the questions, how can I help? What are you experiencing? Are able to report back to investors perhaps groundbreaking disruptions. So I think those two elements are really crucial because they're evidential. I want to finish with a talk from that I saw a couple of years back from this gentleman, Hyrik Surinen. He has a business called Play, which is a $40 million fund for the gaming industry. And prior to that, he had raised more than $60 million for different gaming ventures that he was involved in. So highly successful entrepreneur, very successful at pitching. And these were three crucial elements that he believes we should focus on when we're crafting our pitch. So the first is, and we touched on it quite a bit, what is the opportunity that you are putting in front of the investor? And sometimes this is a real can't see the forest for the trees situation. We spend so much time communicating the detail of all of those buckets of content in our pitch that are we clearly communicating what is the principal opportunity? And then he follows that up interestingly with, why should the investor get excited about this opportunity? And so what is it in your opportunity that is really worthy of getting excited about? So those two things are designed to stimulate in the investor appetite. They want this to happen. They want to be part of this. So when you clearly focus on communicating those two things, and I suggest you put aside half an hour or 20 minutes or whatever to just focus on those two questions so that you can communicate them. And then the third is a very functional idea, and we've discussed it already, a simple single message on each slide. So you want the audience, when they're looking at a slide, to think, to have in their mind, I understand what is being communicated here. And even if there is detail on the slide, it is substantiating or reinforcing that single key message, which can be expressed with an image or an icon, or perhaps it's numbers, or perhaps it's a statement, whatever it is. So I'm not sure if we have the facility for question and answer, but I'll leave my details here available to you. And with Stone and Chalk, we're doing a monthly session which is a couple of hours with founders, where I review your pitch in that circumstance, and I'm also available for one-to-one sessions. So I'll hand back to Jackie to facilitate the rest of the session.
Yeah, so we do actually have question and answers available. So if anyone does have a question for Peter, just drop it in the box below. Peter, are you able to share those slides? We are actually recording this, so we'll be able to share the recording, which includes the slides, I guess.
Yes, certainly.
We have a question here.
Okay, so this is coming in the chat stream.
It just says very informative, so thank you. That's great feedback.
Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can access the chat. Okay.
Yeah, no questions coming in there.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay, great. Well, if anyone does have questions, please get in touch with me or your own community managers in your cities. We do our small group sessions with Peter. It's about 5 in the room. It's a great opportunity to practice your own pitch and your delivery and refine everything. And also to learn about other community residents and what they do and what their business does. So keep an eye on Stone Press for that if you want to join one of those sessions. All right, great. Thanks so much, Peter.
No problem. Good luck, everybody. And I think I was talking with a cohort last night in Singapore, and they're very early stage companies. And I think this is a time that is very challenging and very difficult. And we know that there are people in the world who are suffering enormously, and it's really very upsetting. And then, you know, even within our own community, we live in the lucky country. We're a healthy country. we have enormous advantage over people in the rest of the world, but still it's very difficult. And but I think we'll be looking back on this time as a time where we learnt a lot. We learnt a lot about ourselves. We challenged ourselves in ways that, and we were able to achieve things that we never thought possible. And my own parents, I don't believe how old I am. I just can't believe it. I still always think of myself as a 16-year-old with a wise parents. And my mum and dad used to always hark back to the days of the Depression when, you know, when there was a birthday in the street, they would gather around a single little cake with one candle and the whole street would celebrate that person's birthday. And that's what my mum would look back on the Depression years with fondness about. So, you know, we are strong, resilient, wonderful people. And as challenging as it is, you're going to find this a time of great strength, and good luck to you all.